Van Dickens here, pastor of the Monroe United Methodist Church in Monroe, Iowa. Welcome to our Bible study time. Let's begin with prayer, shall we? May the Lord bless and keep us. May the Lord make his face to shine upon us and be gracious unto us. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. Today we are studying Psalm 30 and 31. Psalm 30 is a briefer psalm than 31, so we will read straight through that psalm, and then we will take a look and study Psalm 31 bit by bit. And with that, let's begin. Psalm 30, and I'm reading out of the New Revised Standard Version. It starts off as a song at the dedication of the Temple of David. Those are actually in as part of an intro to this, and we'll talk about that. But let's proceed. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up, and did not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. O Lord, you brought up my soul from Sheol, restored me to life from among those gone down to the pit. Sing praises to the Lord, O you his faithful ones, and give thanks to his holy name, for his anger is but for a moment, his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. By your favor, O Lord, you had established me as a strong mountain. You hid your face. I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cried, and to the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my death if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it tell of your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me. O Lord, be my helper. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. Well, this is a fascinating psalm. It was understood as a psalm that was used to begin the season of Hanukkah. And as I'm conducting today's Bible study, this is, I believe, the second day of Hanukkah in 2021. Hanukkah is the festival that commemorates the restoration of worship back in 165 before Christ, when the Maccabees came and restored the temple. There's no specific mention of the temple, though, in this psalm, so it's been thought that it was actually a much older psalm. Nevertheless, it's been associated with the Hanukkah season. The temple had been in 165, leading up to that date. It had been desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes, and so now the Jews had their temple back and they had restored it. So this particular psalm, even though it goes back perhaps a lot earlier than that, has therefore been associated with Hanukkah. It's when you read the psalm itself, it's much more personal, a personal prayer for recovery and deliverance, mingled with praise. Perhaps the psalmist was in serious illness. It also seems to be a learning curve, if you will, for the psalmist. It begins, the psalmist extols God for drawing him up, in other words, lifting him up out of his situation. I cried to you, you healed me, brought up his soul from Sheol, from death, restored me to life, from among those that had gone down to the pit. So he was apparently at some point as good as dead, together with others who had died, but he was saved. And there's the famous verses. Sing praises to the Lord, verse 4 and 5. Sing praise to the Lord, O you his faithful ones, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is but for a moment, his favors for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning. And all of us have known what that is like, to have a sleepless night, crying our eyes out, and then coming by the next morning, we have whatever is afflicting us, the worst is over, or we have come to grips and we have worked it out or worked through it, or we have found good news come the morning. We realize that our anxiety during the night when we did not sleep well has been answered the next day with better news than what we had. And then we find in verse 6 and 7, interesting. As for me, I said in my prosperity, in other words, when things were going well, I shall never be moved. By your favor, O Lord, you had established me as a strong mountain. But then he says, you hid your face. I was dismayed. So here the psalmist was going through a relatively good time, a prosperous time. Life was going well. His life was well. Perhaps he was healthy, prosperous. And then God hid his face. That is at least what the psalmist is experiencing. And he was dismayed. He was thinking, well, God has hid his face because I'm going now. I was prosperous and now I'm not. I was in a good place and now I'm in a bad place. Has God hid his face? To you, O Lord, I cried, verse 8. And to the Lord I made supplication. And this is his supplication. What profit is there in my death if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it tell of your faithfulness? In other words, there's no way I can praise the Lord when I'm dead. That's his supplication. It's the words he's giving to God. Hear, O Lord, be gracious to me, O Lord, be my helper. So then in verse 11, it then turns into an affirmation again. You've turned my mourning into dancing, taken off my sackcloth, which is the clothing of those who are in mourning. You've taken off my sackcloth, you clothed me with joy, so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. The purpose of his life, having been redeemed by God, is to praise God and to never be silent about it. But it is after the psalmist has gone through this personal experience where at one point he felt as if God had hidden his face from him and he was dismayed. But he cries out to the Lord redeems him, and he realizes something has happened now. And here's my point. If we were to look at this psalm, one might think, well, this is the psalmist this person is going to have a real roller coaster ride in life. He's going to go from trusting in God to feeling like God has hidden his face, to trusting God to feeling like God has hidden his face, back and forth and back and forth. God is with me, God is not. God is with me, God is not. But this psalm is teaching the psalmist, and therefore you and me, that just because we go through a rocky time, a difficult time, whether that's personal illness or a national or international or global calamity, like what we're in right now, it doesn't mean that God has hidden his face. It means that we completely and utterly rely upon God, and that God is present even in the hard times. Otherwise, we couldn't turn to God and make our supplication. So the rock-solid affirmation ends in verse 11 and 12. You have turned my mourning into dancing. God has taken off my sackcloth and clothe me with joy. Imagine a little child who doesn't yet know how to put on his or her clothes. And the Lord is removing the old sackcloth. And here, let me put your clothes on right. Let me get you pull your arm through your sleeve. This is the sleeve of joy, and we're just going to throw away those old nasty torn clothes of mourning. That's the sense I get from the psalmist, and he's clothed with joy. And it's not as if this is a joy that is going to be yanked off like clothes whenever he goes through another bout of difficulty. No, he's going to keep those clothes on so that when he faces future calamity, he can nevertheless rejoice in God. And we're going to see this even more clearly in the next psalm. But I wanted you to get this sense from the psalm that he has learned that even when it seems that God is absent, God is not. And we must trust that. And the joy that we have when life is going well is the joy we can have when life is not going well, because the Lord will redeem us. Maybe not in the here and now, but ultimately, God will. And that the purpose of life, the psalmist's life, our life, is not to weep, but to rejoice. The psalmist learned something here. Maybe we can too. This particular psalm is very traditionally, in the tradition of the Christian church, this is a very popular psalm to be read on Easter Sunday. Think about that. Gives us a new understanding of God's presence in all of life. Now, Psalm 31. Let's think about that. It's a very weighty psalm. It's one, and Jesus was aware of all of the psalms. We as Christians who consider the words of Jesus, we find his words, or rather the psalmist's words, in the mouth of Jesus in Psalm 31, and we will see it when we read this. But let's begin. Psalm 31. In you, O Lord, I take refuge. Do not let me ever be put to shame. In your righteousness deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. You are indeed my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out of the net that is hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. Now let's pause there. That's the first 5 verses out of 24 verses here. So, like many psalms, it's first of all, it begins as an affirmation. In you I seek refuge. And then a petition. Do not let me ever be put to shame. Hear me, incline your ear to me. Rescue me, not when you get around to it, but speedily. Affirmations of God here, being you, the names that are given to God include the rock, refuge, stronghold, fortress. And because God is all of these things, the psalmist uses several words for deliverance. Rescue me, deliver me, save me, help me. Why? Because you're my rock, my refuge, my stronghold, my fortress. The verse here that we find that was used by Jesus on the cross, it was the last words he spoke. Into your hand I commit my spirit. But what we forget is what was in his mind, even though we don't see the following words on Jesus' lips spoken on the cross. It was certainly in his mind, the rest of that verse. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. And that gets us back to the lesson that was learned in the previous psalm. The psalmist, by the end of Psalm 30, has learned to not be dismayed thinking that God has hidden his face, but rather to rejoice in the Lord at all times. And here, Jesus' words, when he recites the psalm on the cross, into your hand I commit my spirit, knowing that God has redeemed him. Now, has God redeemed him? He's in agony on the cross. Has God redeemed him? Well, it doesn't look like it. But Jesus knows that this is the God who is the God of redemption. And even as he speaks his final words, he knows that by committing his life in God's hand, he is redeemed and ultimately will be fully redeemed, as indeed our faith professes. He died, but he was raised to new life and is alive and reigning on high forevermore. Amen. When it says, into your hand I commit my spirit, the sense here is it's not into your hands I'm being placed like cradle. There's a song, he's got the whole world in his hands. That's one sense. But here it's into your hand. And then it's contrasted from the hand of the enemy. Let's take a look at this. You're indeed my rock and fortress, in verse 3, for your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out of the net that is hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. And then it says in another place, in verse 15, my times are in your hand, singular, in your hand. Deliver me from the hand, singular, of my enemies and persecutors. So by committing into God's hand, it's the contrast here is, imagine the enemy is dragging you away. It's a very different image than being cradled. You're being involuntarily, forcefully dragged along by the enemy. But the psalmist here is contrasting that image by saying, instead of the enemy dragging me away to my peril, take me with your hand, O Lord. I commit my life into your hand, which is a life-saving hand. In fact, in verse 15, my times, in other words, my future, are in your hand. That's going to lead me with your strong hand into my salvation. He goes on. You hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will exult and rejoice in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You've taken heed of my adversities, and have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. That play on of the word hand, singular hand, it runs throughout. Have set my feet. Interesting. If he's going to talk about hand, he's going to talk about feet too. You have set my feet on a broad place. In other words, you've given me some space. I'm not being crowded by my adversities and my adversaries. You've set me in a broad place where I have some space now, and I'm not afraid they're going to come in and pounce on me. Be gracious to me, O Lord, in verse 9, for I am in distress. My eye wastes away from grief, my soul and body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my misery, and my bones waste away. This is a psalmist who's very human. And we have to remember that Jesus on the cross was indeed very human. It doesn't mean that he was enjoying anything about the cross. He was going through the worst human experience that can be conceived. And the psalmist is going through a difficult time too. That doesn't mean he's faithless. When he cries out his agony, it means that he is acknowledging his human condition. My eye wastes away from grief. You ever been there? Where you've cried your eyes out, where you have no more tears to cry. You've been crying so long, the salt in your tear ducts have made your eyes puffy, whatever the grief might be. And he's saying that it's not just his eyes, my soul and body also, all the way to the bones. I'm in this time of sorrow. He goes on, if that weren't bad enough, in verse 11, I'm the scorn of all my adversaries, a horror to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. And that's what he is seeing externally. And now this is what he is experiencing internally. I have passed out of mind like one who is dead. I've become like a broken vessel. In other words, a perishing vessel. For I hear the whispering of many, terror all around, and as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. It's as if the whispers are worse than the shouts. Have you ever suspected people were speaking ill of you? You may not hear it directly head on, but you've heard little inklings here and there of people speaking in ways about you that are not nice. And, those whispers can be worse than the direct words spoken against you. And this is what the psalmist is experiencing. He's laying his life on the line. Doesn't mean he's faithless. It doesn't mean that he's not confident that God will deliver him, but he is speaking the nature of his agony. And certainly we are aware that that is what Jesus was confessing on the cross when he was saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? In all fairness to Jesus, when he is saying this, there's another that is from a different psalm, but that is followed by the psalmist in the words that Jesus is using there is with words of affirmation. Just as we find in this psalm, it follows. But I trust in you, O Lord, verse 14. I say you are my God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies and persecutors. Let your face shine upon your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. Do not let me be put to shame, O Lord, for I call on you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them go dumbfounded to Sheol, not me. Let the lying lips be stilled that speak insolently against the righteous with pride and contempt. In other words, he is suffering because of his trust that he has placed in the Lord. His faith has become the object of scorn in the eyes of his enemies. Certainly that was the case with Jesus, and he's praying like the psalmist that his life does not end in shame. Now, from a worldly point of view, it certainly seemed to be the case, and yet he was redeemed. His life ended up not being put to shame, and so too is the psalmist. In verse 19, oh, how abundant is your goodness, that you have laid up for those who fear you and accomplished for those who take refuge in you. In the sight of everyone, in the shelter of your presence, you hide them from human plots. You hold them safe under your shelter from contentious tongues. Even after all that he has expressed, all the agony that he has endured, he rejoices that God is redeeming him. Blessed be the Lord, in verse 21, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was beset as a city under siege. In other words, I bless the Lord when I have experienced my worst, because he is showing his steadfast love. He is going to redeem me. I had said in my alarm, I'm driven far from your sight. But you heard my supplications when I cried out to you for help. So like the previous psalm, this psalm acknowledges that in the worst of time, when he felt that God had driven him away from God's sight, that was not the case. God actually did hear his supplications when he cried out. So in both psalms, that's for me the take home. That's the dividend I get out of both of these psalms, is that even in those times when we fear God has hidden his face, or when we have been driven from God's sight, it is not true. God is there. God hears our supplications, our cries. Even when we've cried our eyes out, when there's no more tears, God hears us, and God will respond. And that is the good news of this psalm and the one previous, to the point where the psalmist ends in these words in verse 23 and 24. Love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts haughtily. Be strong. Let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. This means that the psalmist, and not just the psalmist, but all those, all the saints, which saints equals those who steadfastly love the Lord, those who hold on to their faith, loving the Lord, and knowing that the Lord loves them, knowing that God will preserve them, but repays the one who acts haughtily. In other words, the one who scorns the faithful ones for being faithful, the ones who speak ill of those who place their trust in God's hand. The psalmist here is saying the Lord's going to repay those who have acted this way to the saints, against the saints. And then he ends, be strong, let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. And when he says wait for the Lord, here I sense, and other commentaries sense too, that the deliverance that the psalmist is rejoicing in, it's, I guess the word is eschatological. It's a here and not yetness here that's going on. He is rejoicing that the Lord is going to redeem him and his saints. If not today, it will surely come. Wait for the Lord. And surely that is the sense in which we hear the words of Jesus when he says, I commit my life into your hands. He trusts by waiting on the Lord, even on the cross, that the Lord will rescue him, the Lord will redeem him. And that is our hope too, in life and death, in life beyond death. Praise be to God. Bless the Lord. Well, God bless you in this day. May you trust in the Lord and wait for the Lord in whatever circumstance you and I find ourselves in, knowing that God is going to redeem us. In fact, we can trust, we can place our lives in God's hand today, knowing that he will lead us into life everlasting. God bless and keep you. Bye now.